For the citizens of Calumet, Colorado, the Third World War began on an otherwise calm September morning. Disguised as civilian airliners, Soviet, Cuban, and Nicaraguan paratroopers appeared over the town without warning, part of a wider effort to block critical transport nodes linked to passes in the Rocky Mountains. The attack achieved complete surprise, with students still in their first classes of the morning and workers only a few hours into their shifts. None were aware that their town had become a critical objective in the largest and most daring military operation in human history. Resistance from the local police department and armed citizens lasted only a few panicked minutes, completely outmatched by crack airborne units, many of which had seen action in the battlefields of Afghanistan, Cuba, Mexico, and Central America. In under an hour, light fortifications sprung up across the town, and citizens of fighting age were rounded up and corralled into holding areas. Before many in the town even understood what was happening, the first wave had already been reinforced with heavier, air-dropped equipment. Armored vehicles and sequestered civilian cars and trucks were used to block the roads in and out of Calumet, trapping its population in what were now the occupied territories. The initial American response was confused and disorganized, consisting primarily of Army helicopters and Air Force craft dispatched to ascertain the nature and scope of the Soviet incursion. A hasty American counterattack consisting of an armed thrust directed at Calumet was launched after nightfall. Comblock forces had lost most of their night vision and anti-tank guided missiles throughout the drop and subsequent action, and were now at their most vulnerable. Their commander, however, Colonel Ernesto Bella of the Cuban Revolutionary Army, was uniquely suited to these conditions. A veteran of several guerrilla campaigns, Colonel Bella had immense experience mitigating the weaknesses of a lightly armed force to maneuver and destroy even far heavier armored units. The American tanks were countered with dispersed RPG teams hidden in the strips of woodland that ringed the town, and by dawn the next morning, any hope of rapidly liberating Calumet had evaporated. By the end of September, Calumet was now 40 miles behind the lines, which stretched southwards from Alaska and up from Mexico, nearly cutting the United States in half. It was now home to a major garrison of the Soviet Army, a critical logistics hub in support of the ongoing siege of Denver, further to the east. Private weapons were seized, and townspeople the Soviets believed might be troublesome to the occupation were relocated into permanent re-education camps. The largest of these was centered around Calumet's drive-in theater. Yet, Soviet success was not total. Rumors began to spread across the town that both Comblock soldiers and collaborators among the townspeople had been attacked and killed. The violence behind these attacks drew the attention of the KGB, prompting further arrests and reprisals. Among those suspected were a group of students who had fled into the countryside during the first wave. Included among them was Jed Eckert, a former high school football star, and Darrell Bates, the son of Calumet's mayor. Family members that had provided them guns and equipment were executed by firing squad, and whether these students were behind the attacks or not, this act above all is widely considered to have sparked a campaign that would beguile the Comblock forces for the remainder of the war, the Colorado Insurgency. While previous attacks had seemed random and disorganized, the disappearance of 3 off-duty Soviet soldiers in Arapaho National Forest appeared to indicate that local resistance had grown into a more effective force. Sectors the Soviets had considered pacified were reopened, and no units smaller than a full squad were permitted to operate outside of secured areas. Comblock appears to have taken this as proof that Jed Eckert's student group was responsible, and directives issued for his capture. In the aftermath of the Arapaho attack, increased pressure was placed on Mayor Bates to provide information regarding the insurgency, with the well-being and safe return of his son, should he be captured, used as an effective motivator. Despite this pressure, Calumet's mayor's actions lacked any meaningful resistance or obfuscation when reporting on those families or individuals he believed to be especially hostile and potentially violent towards the occupation forces. After many of these people were executed, his willingness to aid Soviet authorities turned him into a collaborationist figure in the eyes of his constituents. But the continued reprisals did little to deter further attacks by these guerrillas, and likely only intensified their resolve. Operating under the name Wolverines, reappropriated from Calumet High's football team, this group initially limited its attacks to isolated com-block units and vehicles. With the lines stabilized everywhere along the front, throughout October, the Wolverines were given ample opportunity to hit supply convoys, disrupt communication lines, and sabotage key infrastructure. Several of those within the group had extensive hunting experience and used their knowledge of the local terrain to funnel com-block units into predetermined kill zones. Their tactics were further inspired by the historic campaigns of the Apache, Blackfoot, as well as the survivalist methods of Jim Bridger and Jedediah Smith, after whom Jed Eckert was named. These attacks grew so successful that the Wolverines were able to annihilate mechanized platoons, or even conduct strikes in the heart of Calumet itself. One such attack, the bombing of the Soviet-American Friendship Center, was a noticeable embarrassment to the occupation authority, and another setback for Colonel Bella. With first-hand knowledge of guerrilla warfare, he had argued against reprisals and firing squads, but had been overruled by his superiors. It wasn't until a brazen attack on an improvised Soviet airstrip, in which several prized Yak-38 VTOL craft were destroyed, that the elimination of the Wolverines became a major priority. That same attack had freed hundreds of captives from Calumet's re-education camp that was located nearby, and dozens of newly armed additional insurgent groups were formed in the following weeks. The sophisticated nature of the attack, which involved precise flanking maneuvers and grazing fire, led further credence to rumors that American Special Forces, Green Berets, had embedded themselves within the Wolverines. Following the war, it was disclosed that such an operation would have only been possible in the spring, and that a downed F-15 pilot might have been responsible for the sudden leap in their capabilities and tactics. Regardless, the Wolverines had become well known on both sides of the front line, and a notable factor in any military planning. In January, a contingent of Soviet paratroopers under Spetsnaz command were deployed to Calumet. Their ranking officer, Colonel Strelnikov, agreed with Bella's own assessments of the situation and demanded an immediate end to the reprisals against civilians. The mayor's son, Darrell Bates, was betrayed by his father and captured, forced to swallow a tracking device before being freed. He led Soviet forces back to the Wolverines' encampment, but the attacking force was ambushed in the mountains and annihilated. Betrayed by one of their own, and their location, names, and photos now dispersed throughout the occupied territories, the Wolverines' insurgency had run out of places to hide and resupply. Its members were finally caught out in the open by Soviet gunships, which reported at least a dozen insurgents killed in the ensuing action. A final suicidal attack launched against Calumet itself was the final battle fought by the Wolverines, in which both Jed Eckert and his brother Matt were killed. The insurgency was marked as destroyed, though rumors persisted that this last attack was in fact a diversion, allowing some of their remaining members to escape into free America. The Colorado Insurgency and the actions of the Wolverines are commemorated today on a simple monument, a rock on which their fighters, mostly children, marked the names of their dead. They fought here alone and gave up their lives so that the United States shall not perish from the earth.
In high command, the Templin Institute investigates the greatest battles, conflicts, and wars from across alternate worlds. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to join the Templin Institute, consider pledging to our Patreon page. Along with increased security access, you'll be able to vote in polls to determine future topics, get custom wallpaper every week, and receive some other exclusive rewards.